Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 198, A Tangled Matrimonial Web. Part 1. George Harold Asquith had multiple marriages, multiple names, and was not only charged for bigamy once but twice. George Harold Asquith was born on the 9th of August 1890 at Hillgrove near Armidale, New South Wales, to George Harold Asquith and Elizabeth Harriet Ann Emerson. He was the eldest of 3 children. George married Muriel Edith North in the Christchurch in Enmore in New South Wales on the 21st of September 1909 when he was 19 and Muriel 17. They had a son, James Norman Harold Asquith, on the 22nd of January 1910, 4 months after their marriage. Only 2 months after the birth of their son, in the Police Gazette, a warrant has been issued by the Newtown bench for the arrest of George Harold Asquith, charged with wife desertion. He's 19 years of age, 5 foot 3 or 4 inches high, stout build, fair hair and complexion, clean shaved, blue eyes, usually dressed in a dark suit and a black hard hat. And the complainant was Muriel Edith Asquith of 3 Fotheringham Street, Marrickville. Only 3 days after this was placed in the Police Gazette, their baby, James Norman Asquith, died on the 26th of March 1910, aged only a little less than 3 months. George's occupation on his son's death certificate was a private detective. Only a month after the death of their son, George Asquith was arrested at Katoomba on the 27th of August 1910. He was charged with stealing a horse and a saddle and a bridle, all recovered, the property of Robert John Rolfe, and was committed on trial for both charges. The details of this case were outlined. George Harold Asquith was charged with stealing a horse, the property of John Rolfe of Blackheath. Senior Constable Yates deposed to the arrest at Lawson, where he apprehended the accused on a passenger train. On arrival at the police station, the accused made a statement, which was to the following effect. "I am married and have been 2 months away from my wife, working at Blackheath. I hired a horse from J. Rolfe, intending to look at Govetts Leap and the Grand Canyon. I don't know what made me ride on, but I rode through Katoomba and on to Lawson. On arriving at Lawson, I wired my aunt in Sydney for some money. I was then taken ill and carried to a neighbour's house where I remained for the night. The man where I stayed asked me if I would sell the horse. I said I would sell the turnout, that is, the horse, the saddle and the bridle, for £5. As the horse would not go in the harness, no deal resulted. I offered the horse to others, but no business resulted. I eventually left the horse with a young man named Davis, who was to feed it and sell it for £10. I saw a constable come into the house, and knowing he was after me, I ran out the back gate and into the bush, intending to get away to Sydney. I boarded the train and was off to Sydney when arrested." The witness then charged the accused and locked him up. R.J. Rolfe stated that on the 4th, the accused borrowed a horse for the afternoon for 5 shillings. The accused reported a shoe loose, and the witness instructed him to go to the blacksmith's and get the shoe fixed. The accused rode away and never returned. The witness then informed the police and laid the information. H.R. Marshall, a dairyman, stated that he first saw the accused at the post office at Lawson, where he was ill, having a fit of some sort. Out of pity, the witness took him to his house, gave him tea and breakfast, as the accused said he had nowhere to go and had no friends. The next morning, the accused told him he'd ridden from Lithgow and was desirous of selling his horse. He offered the horse, the saddle and the bridle for £4 5 shillings, but as it would not go in a cart, the witness declined to purchase. L.C. Davis, a jockey, stated that the accused left the horse in his possession and that he subsequently handed it over to Constable Easterbrook. Constable Easterbrook deposed to seeing the accused with the horse and hearing it was wanted, went to Davis's paddock and took possession of the turnout. Asquith was committed for trial in the Parramatta Court of Sessions on both charges, and this was outlined in the Blue Mountains Echo on the 16th of April 1910. Only a few weeks later, on the 5th of May 1910, George Harold Asquith was charged on a warrant for wife desertion and has been arrested by Senior Constable Garden and Constable Leonard of Sydney Police, and he was ordered to pay 12 shillings 6 per week and £1 7 shillings 6 costs. And then, only 7 days later, he was discharged on a good behaviour bond for the theft of the horse, the saddle and the bridle, no doubt because it was his first conviction. He then was employed as a tally clerk and a special watchman. He was employed as a clerk at Gilchrist, Watt and Sanderson in Sydney. After the death of his father, his mother remarried, and she died on the 1st of October 1910, under the name of her second marriage, Elizabeth C. There was a memorial notice placed in the paper in 1915. As it says, in loving memory of our dear mother and niece, Elizabeth C., in her 44th year, inserted by her loving son and daughter-in-law, George and Muriel Asquith, and their children. And it also mentions an aunt, M. Light. And that comes up as one of the aliases that George uses. And I took a little bit of time to work out where that alias has come from, and it seems that he's borrowed it from his aunt's surname. And then on the 2nd of February 1914, he joined the senior cadets as a provisional lieutenant. He enlisted in World War I on the 27th of August 1914. Said he was 24 and born in Armidale and was working as a clerk. He initially listed his next of kin as Miss L. Hyland of Liverpool, but this was updated to list his wife, Mrs. Muriel Asquith of 16 Eaton Street, Camberdown, New South Wales, as his next of kin. He stated his previous service was serving in the 2nd Military District Senior Cadets, but also there was 2 years of Scottish Rifles that was listed as previous service. He was a driver in the war and returned to Australia by the Ulysses on the 15th of April 1914, deemed medically unfit due to rheumatism, and he was discharged from the Army on the 14th of May 1915. By the 6th of October 1915, another warrant was issued at Newtown for the arrest of George Harold Asquith with wife desertion. He's 25, 5'7" or 8 inches high, with a nuggety build, a fair complexion, very fair hair, clean-shaved, dressed in dark clothes and a black hard hat and a labourer, and the complainant was Muriel Asquith of 16 Eaton Street, Camberdown. 6 months later, he married Blanche Edith Farron on the 24th of April 1916 in Sydney, thus committing bigamy. Blanche also committed bigamy by marrying George Asquith. George enlisted in World War I again on the 3rd of November 1916. He initially enlisted under the name of Harold Asquith Buchanan, but the record then was changed to his birth name. He correctly stated his age and birthplace and that he was a clerk. He listed Muriel as his next of kin. Blanche was 3 years older than George. She'd been born Blanche Edith Hobbs, and she'd married Joseph Leslie Farron in Mossman on the 21st of April 1905. On the 14th of December 1916 in the Singleton Argus, double bigamy charge, returned soldier in court. A returned soldier, George Harold Asquith, and Blanche Edith Farron were each charged with bigamy at the Central Police Court on Tuesday in Sydney. They were both committed for trial and bail was allowed in both cases. Evidence of witnesses who had attended the wedding ceremonies was taken. Thomas L. Bathurst, Secretary of the Returned Soldiers Association, stated that he was present when the accused, Asquith, was married on the 24th of April 1916. Thomas North, machinist in Sydney, stated that he was at the marriage ceremony between Asquith and his sister, Muriel Edith North, in September 1909. Vincent Farron, a painter from Campsie, gave evidence he was in attendance at the wedding of his brother and the accused, Blanche Farron, on the 21st of April 1905. Farron said she married Asquith to benefit herself. Her real husband, from whom she had been separated, knew of the present trouble and was prepared to forgive her. Asquith said that he'd been invalidated home from the front and he was willing to return to his wife. Judge Docker said that bigamy was a major crime, that the two accused, dissatisfied with their married lives, agreed to go through a form of marriage together. His Honour said that this was a deliberate crime. It was not the result of a sudden temptation, but gross unfaithfulness on part of each. He sentenced Blanche Farron to 6 months light labour in the reformatory for women or of any institution that were willing to take her, and he would be prepared to make a recommendation. In his army record, it's listed from the police department to the army in the Criminal Investigation Branch on the 28th of July 1917 in Sydney. I beg to report that the above-named Harold Asquith, alias Harold Asquith Buchanan, was arrested at the Warren camp in Marrickville on the 4th of December 1916 by Detective Farley on a charge of bigamy. He then gave the name of George Harold Asquith. The following is a copy of the charge and conviction. George Harold Asquith, aged 26, did on the 21st of September 1909 at Enmore, married Edith North, and that while so married, on the 24th of April 1916 in Sydney, married Blanche Edith Hobbs or Farron, the said Edith North being then alive. He was convicted at the Sydney Court of Sessions on the 21st of January 1917 and sentenced to 12 months hard labour. And at Liverpool in October 1917, there's a statutory declaration in his army records. George Harold Asquith of Military Camp Liverpool. My correct name is George Harold Asquith. I am identical with Private Buchanan Harold Asquith, who enlisted at the Showgrounds camp in Sydney on the 3rd of November 1916. Joseph enlisted in World War I in March 1915. He was fighting in France when this marriage occurred, and he was wounded in action on the 29th of July 1917. His army record says he was discharged on the 8th of November 1918 for family reasons, no doubt being informed that his wife was in jail due to marrying somebody else. It was stated that Blanche Farron had been drawing £2 2 a week from the pay of her husband since he went to France, and she'd recently received letters from him. Joseph was not living with Blanche in 1930, but by 1934 Blanche was listed living with her husband Joseph. He was a tailor and they lived at Marrickville. They had 3 children, Leslie in 1905, Reginald in 1911, and then when she returned to her husband they had Yvonne in 1924. And just a little bit of information on Blanche's children. The eldest, Leslie, was murdered in 1926. Says the Crown Prosecutor said that Leslie Farron lived at his father's home at Marrickville, and at 1:45 a.m. on the 17th of April 1926, he heard a noise in the house and he saw a man known to the family, Peter Hollywood, aged 44, standing outside the kitchen window. He grabbed him and was struck in the face. His father came to his assistance and knocked Hollywood down. Young Farron at this time was bleeding from wounds in the face and neck. One wound was 5 inches long. Hollywood ran away with Farron in pursuit, and they struggled until a policeman arrived. The allegation was that Hollywood had stabbed the youth with a carving knife that had been taken from the kitchen. In a statement from the dock, Hollywood said he'd been drinking all day, he had no recollection of going to Farron's house, and he denied having struck Farron with a knife. He said he'd always been on good terms with the Farron family and had often been in the company of the son. He was the last man in the world to do them any injury. However, on the 4th of June 1926, it was announced in the Daily Express in Wagga Wagga that Leslie Farron had died as a result of this attack, and that Peter Hollywood, a machinist, was sentenced to 2.5 years imprisonment. The second son, Reginald, was born in 1911, and at the age of 18 he was quite prolific in the papers for small misdemeanours. In the Hurstville Propeller, on the 12th of July 1929, it mentions that Reginald Harcourt Farron, aged 18, was fined £3 in default of 1 month's imprisonment for behaving in an offensive manner at Bexley. Constable Muir stated that the defendant, when arrested, had been drinking coffee royal. On the 5th of March 1930 in the Sydney Sun, out of work for some time, Reginald Harcourt Farron, 18, and William Raymond Farrell, aged 18, according to evidence at the Newtown Police Court today, took possession of an empty house at Marrickville and while there stole food. On charges of theft, they were bound over to be of good behaviour for 12 months. But it was barely 2 weeks later, when in the Sydney Daily Pictorial on the 22nd of March 1930, it says Reginald Farron, labourer, was charged with having stolen a wristlet watch from the home of his aunt. He said, "I saw it on the dresser and the temptation was too strong. And I have a mania for taking small things," he said. He was previously convicted for stealing money from phone boxes. His father said, "He's uncontrollable as far as I'm concerned. He will take no notice of me whatsoever." And as a result of that, Reginald got 3 months jail. He'd barely been out a few months when it was mentioned that on the 4th of October 1930 in the Bathurst National Advocate, the recent tragedy at Newtown when a youth named Swan was fatally shot by a constable was recalled at the Darlinghurst Sessions today when Reginald Farron, 18, and William Kerrin, 18, were alleged to have been concerned in the affray and were charged with having broken and entered into a dwelling. According to the evidence, the accused committed the offence while on bail in the Newtown case. Both the accused were convicted and sentenced to 18 months jail. And then in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 20th of June 1933, remanded for sentence. Reginald Harcourt Farron, 22, clerk, and William Raymond Farrell, 21, electrician, so they're back to their old tricks, pled guilty to 4 charges of breaking, entering and stealing and 1 charge of attempted breaking and entering. And they received 12 months hard labour that was to commence at the expiration of the sentence now served. And then in September 1943, Reginald Farron was featured in a divorce case. It says Reginald Farron was the gentleman responsible for Nellie Campbell's obvious infidelity. Nellie didn't have much more to say in the case. It says that when her husband returned from war, he took her to their home at 204 Coronation Parade, Enfield, and later the same evening, she entered a private hospital where a child was born the next morning. The following day, when her husband called in to see his wife, she handed him a letter that read, "I wish to name Reginald Farron, 82 Newington Road, Marrickville, as the father of my son, who was born on the 14th of August 1942, and I do not wish to draw any allotment from the army or my husband for myself or my daughter, Nancy Irene." Campbell was a lift driver in civilian life and was 22 when he married Nellie, known as Ellen Leach. At the Roman Catholic Church of St Pius at Enmore, Nellie was a valve maker and was 18, and at last report had an address of 56 Burlington Road, Homebush, and a decree nisi was granted. The third child of Blanche Farron was Yvonne, who was born in 1924 when her parents reunited. She moved to the US when she was 22, and she married 4 times. Joseph Farron died in 1949 and Blanche died in 1962. So getting back to George, he was placed in jail for 12 months as a result of the bigamy charge with Blanche Farron. And then he embarked from Sydney for England on the 29th of December 1917 and served as a gunner in France. While over in the UK, on the 25th of July 1918, he married Caneen Wishart at Swansea, Glamorganshire, England. So effectively this is his 3rd marriage that he's had. He returned to Australia on the 1st of February 1919, and Caneen Wishart died on the 24th of February 1919 in Weymouth, Dorset, England. On the 20th of February 1919, he was discharged from the AIF in Sydney and deemed medically unfit. On the 14th of May 1919, there is a notice in the Government Gazette, "Missing Friends." Missing since 9 a.m. on the 11th of May from 61 Lavender Street, North Sydney, where he was boarding, Harold Asquith, 30 years of age, 5 foot 8 or 9 inches high, strong build, fair complexion and hair, clean-shaved, blue eyes, dressed in a navy blue suit, wears 1914-1915 ribbon and 1916 ribbon, also a military medal, has been badly wounded on right side, a returned soldier. Information to No. 6 Police Station, North Sydney. George was in fact in Victoria. He was living with Mary Jane Carr in a de facto relationship, and they had a daughter, Hilda Frances Carr, on the 20th of January 1920 in Oakley, Victoria. Mary Jane, known as Lily, was born in England, and she married George William Hyde in England in 1909. They immigrated to Victoria by 1913 and adopted a daughter, Mabel, who was born Ethel May Walker, in February 1913. By May 1919, they were in Sydney, but she left Sydney with George to live in Oakley. And there's quite a fair bit of information in a large document that was when George was trying to claim repatriation benefits and had quite a bit of history on him. So this is a little bit about his time in Oakley. It says Asquith is living with a woman named Hyde, who is the wife of a petty officer in the Navy. She left Sydney with Asquith in May 1919, taking her daughter with her, aged 7 years and £200. Mr. Hyde's been to Melbourne to try and locate his wife, but he hasn't been successful and returned to Newcastle, New South Wales, where he resides. And at the time that he was living in Oakley, George requested a time payment agreement with the Oakley Soldiers Committee, and there's a report from them saying Asquith was repeatedly requested to call in and sign the time payment agreement to the committee, but he would never do so. He again came before the committee as he was out of work and asked for help. He was granted a week's sustenance. He then went to some private people in the district and told a piteous tale of misery, although as a fact he'd been earning £3 a week up to the time of us helping him. He also complained that we would not help him to buy a business, although in fact he made no application to us, but had been granted everything that he asked. These private people were sympathetic, and he got a loan of £25 from one of them to start a small news agency business. A concert was held and £10 was received and applied for his benefit. The news agency shop was a hopeless adventure, as the committee foresaw. Asquith then borrowed from a moneylender and got another returned soldier to be guarantor for him. The returned soldier is now paying for his folly. Mary divorced George Hyde in 1920, and on the 11th of February 1920 in Sydney, it says 2 warrants have been issued by the Children's Court Bench for the arrest of George Harold Asquith, charged with disobeying magisterial orders for the support of his 2 children. £25 and 12 shillings costs are due. He's 29 years of age, 5'8", stout build, fair complexion, fair hair, clean-shaved, blue eyes, a clerk and a returned soldier. And 3 months later, on the 5th of May 1920, in the Police Gazette at Newtown, a warrant's been issued by the Newtown Bench for the arrest of George Harold Asquith, alias Harold Asquith, alias George Asquith, charged with disobeying a magisterial order for the support of his wife. £7, 3 shillings and 6 pence due. He's 30 years of age, 5'7", stout, strong build, fair complexion, blue eyes, clean-shaved, mole on centre of chest, scar on left knee, wound on right side near abdomen, walks with a slight limp in the left leg, dressed in a dark suit, a returned soldier who wears the 1915-1916 ribbon and a military medal, identical with the discharged prisoner and offender of the same name of 1917 and photo book of 1919. After George left Mary, she commenced a relationship with William James Reed in about 1922 and had a son with him in 1923. William Reed died in 1933, and then Mary married Harry Isherwood in Mayfield, New South Wales in 1937. Mary died in 1979 at the age of 90. Then George married for the 4th time to Elmer Pauline Donlan on the 24th of July 1920 at Lewisham in Sydney. He actually listed his surname, though, as Carr, so he's taken on his ex-de facto partner's surname for this marriage. Elmer Donlan had previously been married to William Dan on the 16th of February 1914 in Manly, and Elmer was a photographer before her first marriage. This marriage was annulled on the 4th of August 1914. William Dan was already married to Mary Ann Dan. They had married 10 years prior and had 1 child together, and Mary Ann, in the statement in the court, said that she and Dan had not lived together for nearly 2 years and he had not supported her properly. Elmer Pauline Donlan, the second wife, stated that she met the accused last December, so December 1913, at a church social, and a few weeks afterwards he proposed marriage. Later on she accepted him. He told her he had been married but was divorced, and after they were married 3 weeks, she learnt that his wife was alive. Her father made inquiries, and subsequently a warrant was issued for Dan's arrest. William received 6 months' jail in Long Bay for this crime. Elmer had a daughter, Pauline Minnie, in Newcastle in April 1916, father listed as unknown. However, on Pauline's marriage certificate, she lists her father as William Daniel Asquith, deceased, a commercial traveller. This was in 1942. George was in fact still alive. It's quite possible that Elmer did say to Pauline that her father was George Asquith. On the 9th of August 1920, in the Sydney Sun, so 3 weeks after his marriage to Elmer Donlan, legal notices the Supreme Court of New South Wales matrimonial causes jurisdiction between Muriel Edith Asquith, petitioner, and George Harold Asquith, respondent. To George Harold Asquith, late of 16 Eaton Street, Camperdown, take notice that Muriel Edith Asquith has commenced a suit against you in this court and is applying for a dissolution of marriage on the grounds of bigamy with adultery with a woman named Farron, adultery with a woman named Hyde, and bigamy with adultery with Caneen Wishart. Take notice you are required to enter an appearance to the said suit in this honourable court on or before the 1st day of November 1920. If you do not do so within the time, the petitioner will proceed and the suit will be heard and determined in your absence. 2 days later in the Police Gazette, in Sydney, a warrant's been issued by the Burwood Bench for the arrest of Harold Carr, correct name Harold Light, charged with fraudulently embezzling the sum of £54, 18 shillings and 8 pence, the property of Robert Tate and others at Rhodes between the 5th and 23rd of July 1920. The offender's 30 years of age, 5 foot 7 or 8 inches high, light brown hair, blue eyes, mole on centre of chest, scar on left kneecap, returned soldier, recently employed at Burgers Limited in Rhodes, identical with offender George Harold Asquith of the Police Gazette of 1920. Elmer Donlan and George had a daughter, Dorothy Ruth Carr, in August 1922. However, she died on the 29th of September 1922 at a home called Nesta in Evans Street, Freshwater, near Manly. On his daughter's death certificate, he stated his occupation as a bread carter. He again featured in the New South Wales Police Gazette on the 29th of November 1922. George Harold Asquith, alias Harold Carr, alias Light, charged on warrants with disobeying magisterial orders in the support of his wife, also embezzling the sum of the property of Robert Tate and others, has been arrested at Manly Police. Both charges withdrawn. Further charged with embezzling the sum of £5, 5 shillings 10 pence, the property of Samuel James Whittaker, fined £5 in default of 2 months' hard labour, identical with the offender of the same name. So Muriel has placed that advertisement in the paper to find him to be able to divorce George in August 1920, and the divorce actually doesn't go through until the 12th of June 1923 in Sydney. And in the Sydney Morning Herald it states, before Justice Gordon, divorce is granted. In this suit, Muriel Edith Asquith sued for a divorce from George Harold Asquith on the grounds of adultery. There were 2 living children of the marriage, aged 8 years and 6 years and 4 months respectively. A decree nisi was granted and petitioner to have the custody of the children. After her divorce, Muriel married H. Schweitzer in Bankstown in 1923, and Muriel died in Bankstown in February 1935 at the age of only 43. George actually remarried Elmer Donlan as George Harold Asquith on the 29th of June 1923 in Newtown. And they had a son, Donald Harold Stephen Asquith, on the 30th of September 1923 in Camperdown. It states in the file on his repatriation claim, I had one child to Dan. This child, Minnie Pauline Donlan, was born on the 19th of April 1916. Both children are with me. I have not lived with Asquith since June 1926. I have a maintenance order of £30 per week against him, which he does not pay. I'm employed as a housekeeper for Mrs. Bull, and I have not previously been aware that a pension was payable to my husband. I received no support from my husband, but received 20 shillings per week from the Child Welfare Department. It stated that in July 1925, he was working in a furniture factory, which he did for 12 months. And then on the 25th of January 1927, Elmer Pauline Asquith puts in a statement to the Repatriation Division. I am the wife of Harold George Asquith, an ex-member of the AIF. I married him in St Stephen's, Newtown, New South Wales in September 1923. I'd previously married him in July 1920 under the name of Harold George Carr, but I discovered that this was a bigamous marriage I went through, and I had another ceremony with him. I have one child. This child is Donald Asquith, who was born in September 1923. Prior to marrying Asquith under the name of Carr, I'd previously been bigamously married to William Dan at Sydney in 1914, and I had this marriage annulled. So where was George after he left Elmer? Well, he went to Melbourne and he was a timekeeper for 7 or 8 months. And in this time, he married for the 5th time to Nellie Elizabeth Quick on the 7th of April 1928 in Fitzroy. They were married at the Salvation Army. Nellie had been born in Bendigo in August 1899, so she was 9 years younger than George. In 1928, they were living in Preston, Victoria. George is listed as Harold Asquith, working as a clerk. They had no children. Nellie married John Sporton in Victoria in 1936 after she divorced George in 1935, and she died in Coburg in 1991 at the age of 92. Why did they divorce? Well, George left her and went to Adelaide, and he was engaged in wagon driving for J. Laddid Cordial Works for about 12 months. He then had a period of unemployment. He's recorded in Adelaide, South Australia on the 5th of March 1929, where he was listed under the name of Harold Emerson, where he was assaulted and a gold chain and watch and £12 in money was stolen from him by two men. He married for the 6th time in South Australia to Irene Agnes May Thompson, a widow, and this was on the 22nd of June 1929 at the Methodist Church in Prospect North, South Australia. He stated he was a bachelor on his marriage certificate, and he used the name Harold George Emerson, so taking on his mother's maiden name. He stated his occupation was a traveller, and they married at the home of Irene's father. Irene was born in Gawler, South Australia in October 1898, so she was 8 years younger than George. Irene had a baby in Norwood, South Australia in July 1916 when she was 17. She then had married John Watson in Adelaide in 1921 and had 3 sons with him in 1921, 1923 and 1925. Her husband John Watson died in May 1925 as a result of an accident. She was only 2 months pregnant with her 3rd child when her husband died. So George Asquith has committed bigamy again. Join me in part 2 to see the outcome of this and whether George has any further marriages. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.